Welcome to the Grateful Living podcast. Join us for this week's episode. Hi, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Grateful Living podcast. I hope you're doing really well. Today's episode is inspired by something that's happened in my own life this week. I won't go into the specifics because honestly, the actual decision isn't really the important part. What matters is what it made me realise. So I found myself sitting there going backwards and forwards in my head. Asking myself, should I do it? Shouldn't I? Is it the right time? Can I afford it? What if it doesn't work out? What if I made the wrong decision? And maybe you've had those exact same thoughts. Maybe yours isn't about business. Maybe it's about leaving a relationship that no longer serves you, or finally booking the therapy session, or applying for the job you've convinced yourself you're not qualified for. Maybe it's starting the business you've dreamed about for years. Maybe it's something as simple as saying yes to yourself more often. Whatever it is, I think we all reach these moments where we're standing at the edge of the next version of our lives. And the strange thing is, we want change, we pray for change, we journal about change, we visualize change, we ask for the universe for change. But when change arrives, disguised as a decision, we freeze because suddenly it becomes real. And that's exactly where I found myself this week. I realized I wasn't actually scared of making the decision. I was scared of what would happen afterwards. What if it didn't work out? What if I regretted it? What if I failed? But then another thought came to my mind. A thought that completely shifted everything. Nothing changes unless something changes. And it sounds obvious, almost too simple. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized how true it is, because we often expect a different life while making exactly the same choices we've always made. We want more confidence without doing the thing that requires courage. We want healthier relationships without changing the standard we've been accepting. We want financial freedom without learning about money. We want better health without making our habits change. We want peace without creating boundaries. We're asking for a different outcome while repeating the same behaviours. And then we wonder why nothing changes. There's this quote that's often attributed to Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Whether he actually said it or not, the principle still lands, because if our decisions stay the same, our future usually stays the same too. And that's when I realised something. The decision in front of me wasn't really about the decision itself. It was about the person I wanted to become. Because every version of you is created by the decisions you make today. The woman you become a year from now, she's built by the conversations you have, the boundaries you set, the habits you commit to, the opportunities you say yes to, and the uncomfortable decisions you're willing to make before you feel completely ready. So if you've been waiting for certainty before the next step, this episode is for you, because today I want to explore why we stay where we are, why our nervous system resists change, and why becoming the person that you want to be almost always requires making decisions before you feel completely ready. Let's dive in. Now, here's the interesting part. Most people think they're scared of change, but I don't actually think that's true. I think we're scared of the unknown. Our brains are designed to keep us alive, not necessarily to help us thrive. Your brain's number one job is survival. It loves what is familiar, even if what's familiar isn't making you happy. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever stayed in a job you hated because at least you knew what to expect? Or stayed in a relationship that wasn't fulfilling because the thought of starting again felt terrifying? Or putting off launching the business, booking the course, or investing in yourself because what if it didn't work out? The brain often prefers a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar possibility, because familiar feels safe. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this beautifully. He explains that every day we wake up and think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and repeat the same behaviours. Over time, those thoughts and behaviours become our identity. Not because they're who we truly are, but because they're who we've been repeatedly practicing being. Think about that. Every morning you wake up thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm terrible with money, I'm not confident, nobody chooses me, I'm always stressed. Then your brain begins looking for evidence to support those beliefs. Again, not because it's true, but because your brain loves certainty. It wants to prove itself right. It creates a filter. So instead of noticing all the opportunities, you notice the obstacles. Instead of recognizing how far you've come, you focus on everything that's still missing. Instead of celebrating progress, you criticize yourself for not being further ahead. And before you know it, you're living inside a story that your own mind has rehearsed thousands of times. That's why change feels uncomfortable. Because you're not just changing an action, you're changing an identity. You're asking your nervous system to believe something it has very little evidence for. For example, imagine someone who has always believed they aren't good enough. Then suddenly they're offered an incredible opportunity. Most people assume they'll feel excited, but often they feel anxious, they procrastinate, they overthink, they question themselves, not because the opportunity is wrong, but because it doesn't match the identity they've been carrying. And this is something I've noticed in my own life too. Every time I've grown, every time I've stepped into something bigger, there has always been a moment where my logical mind starts asking, are you sure? What if it doesn't work? What if you've got this wrong? But I've started asking myself a different question instead. What if I make the same decisions I've always made? Where will I be a year from now? Because sometimes staying where you are feels safer, but over time it becomes far more painful than changing. And I think that's the point where so many of us finally decide enough is enough. One of the biggest mindset shifts I've had over the last few years is this. Not all fear deserves to be listened to. Now, before I go any further, I want to be really clear. Sometimes fear is incredibly important. If you're walking down a dark street and something doesn't feel right, listen to that fear. If someone is treating you badly and your body is telling you something is off, listen to that fear. Our intuition and our instincts are incredibly powerful, but there is another type of fear. The fear that isn't protecting your safety. It's protecting your comfort. And those are two very different things. I think so many of us mistake discomfort for danger. We think, I'm nervous, so this must be wrong. But what if you're nervous because you're doing something you've never done before? Think back to your first day when you started a new job, or the first time you drove a car on your own, or the first time you went to the gym, or the first time you travelled somewhere new. You were probably nervous, but that didn't mean those decisions were wrong. It simply meant that they were unfamiliar. And unfamiliar often feels uncomfortable. One thing I always ask myself, or I always come back to, is this fear trying to protect me, or is it trying to keep me the same? Because they're two completely different questions. Sometimes our comfort zone feels so familiar that we mistake it for safety. But your comfort zone can also become your cage. It's the place where everything is predictable, where nothing stretches you, nothing asks more of you, where you don't risk failure, but you also don't experience the growth you're craving. And I think that's where so many dreams quietly disappear. Not because people weren't capable or that they weren't talented, but because they kept waiting to feel ready. Here's the thing though, I've never met anyone who's achieved something meaningful who said, I felt 100% ready before I did it. Most people look back and say, I was terrified, but I'm so glad I did it. And that's because confidence rarely comes before action. Confidence comes because of the action. It's built on every time you kept a promise to yourself, every time you do something your old self would have avoided, every time you prove to yourself, I can do the hard things. I think we spend so much of our lives waiting to become a confident person when actually confidence is something we create. It's not a personality trait, it's evidence. Evidence that you've survived difficult conversations, evidence that you've made big decisions, evidence that you've tried something new and realised, actually, I can handle more than I thought. So maybe the question isn't, am I ready? Maybe the better question is, who do I become if I say yes to this? Because every decision you make is either reinforcing your current identity or it's building the next one. There's a question I don't think we ask ourselves enough. We're asking, what if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I waste my money? What if I make the wrong decision? But how often do we ask, what if I stay exactly where I am? Because that has a cost too. Sometimes we're so focused on the risk of changing that we completely ignore the risk of staying the same. Let's say you're unhappy in your job. You might spend months or even years thinking, what if I leave and it doesn't work out? But what if you stayed for another 5 years? What's that going to cost you? Your happiness, your confidence, your health, your relationships. The same applies to every area of life. What if you never have that difficult conversation? What if you never set that boundary? What if you never ask for help? There is always a cost. The only question is, which cost are you willing to pay? Because growth has a cost. It asks for courage. It asks for vulnerability. It asks you to become a beginner. It asks you to invest your time, your energy, your money, but staying the same has a cost as well. And often that cost is invisible. It's another year of feeling stuck, another year of doubting yourself, another year of saying maybe next year, another year of watching other people build the life you secretly dream about while telling yourself that your time will come one day. I remember hearing something that really stayed with me. People often overestimate what they can achieve in a year, but underestimate what they can achieve in 5. And I think that's because transformation rarely happens overnight. It's built through small decisions, one decision, then another, until one day you look back and realize you're living a life that your old self could only imagine. And here's something else that I've realized. The biggest changes in my own life haven't happened because I suddenly became fearless. They happened because I decided that staying where I was had become more uncomfortable than moving forward. That's a very different place to make a decision from. Not from fear, not pressure, but a quiet knowing that you're ready for your next chapter. Because here's the truth. The life you're dreaming of probably won't be created in one huge dramatic moment. It will be created by hundreds of small decisions that nobody else sees. The decision to show up, the decision to learn, to ask for help, to back yourself, to try again after something doesn't work. And every single one of those decisions is a vote. A vote for the type of person you're becoming. So, as we come to the end of today's episode, I want to leave you with one thought. Maybe your life doesn't need a complete overhaul. Maybe you don't need to have everything figured out. Maybe you don't need a 10-year plan. Maybe you just need one decision. One conversation you've been avoiding, one boundary you've been afraid to set. One application you've been putting off, one phone call, one investment, one apology, one act of choosing yourself. Because we often think transformation has to happen all at once, but that's not how life works. Transformation is built one decision at a time. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you'll know I talk a lot about identity. Not because it's like trendy, but because I genuinely believe your identity shapes your life. The way you think, the way you speak to yourself, the opportunities you notice, the standards you accept, the decisions you make, everything begins there. So today, instead of asking yourself, what if it goes wrong? I want you to ask yourself a different question. What would the future version of me choose? Not the version of you who's scared, not the version of you who's replaying every worst case scenario, but the version of you who's already built the life you're dreaming about. How would she think? How would she respond? What decision would she make? Because here's something I've learnt. Your future self isn't created by luck. She's created by today's choices. And no, that doesn't mean every decision will work out perfectly. Some won't. Some will teach you lessons you never expected to learn. Some might even take you in a completely different direction. But making a decision is still better than standing still because you're waiting for certainty. Life isn't about making perfect decisions. It's about making intentional ones. Trusting yourself enough to know that even if things don't go exactly to plan, you'll figure it out. Because you always have. And if nobody has told you this recently, I want you to know that you're far more capable than you give yourself credit for. The life you've been dreaming about isn't reserved for other people. It isn't reserved for the people who never feel fear. It belongs to the people who feel the fear and decide that their future matters more than their comfort. So today, I want to leave you with this. If nothing changes, nothing changes. But the beautiful thing is, you get to decide what changes next. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If it resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone else who needed to hear it. You can also leave a review. It really does help the podcast reach more people who might need to hear these conversations. And as always, thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take good care. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at _the_grateful_living.